Okay, here we've got our rig, and we're going to do a jump. Uh, Before I do that, I'm just going to open up this throw again, and we're going to talk a little bit about follow through. Didn't really cover it in those last examples. We talked mostly about overlap, but we're going to actually talk a little bit about both of those again in the same sequence. So in analyzing this reference video, we can see that the hips kind of lead the action. You see that there. The foot's coming up, the hips lead, and then the foot kind of takes over and lands first, and then the hips come second, and then this back foot here continues to follow through. It doesn't just kind of hit a pose and then come down. It continues along its path, right? And then lands. Well, we don't actually have that part of the video, but I'm sure you can kind of figure that out. And the same thing with the pitching hand. Okay, let's go. Here we go. Now watch the hand that throws. You can see it hits its extreme pose for the throw and then continues to follow through the arc. It doesn't just hit that, extreme pose of the throw and then come back to, rest. It follows through that line of action. Because of the force, the arm throwing, it continues along the trajectory. Then it continues to follow down all the way through. Those of you that may have played basketball may remember them saying, when you throw the ball, you follow through with your arm. You don't just stick your arm out and have it stop. You throw and your hand continues to follow that line of action. And it's the same thing using VLC Media Player here. With the body, and again with overlap, going back to overlap too, if we're talking about overlap of this, you've got things happening at different times. The foot lands first, the hips start to move, the foot's kind of continuing to move, the foot lands in the final pose first, then the hips, then the other hand, the throwing hand, and then the back foot comes in at the end. You see the head's kind of dragged back here, and then it starts to go forward a bit and then comes back up. See, and this foot is probably the last thing. That hand kind of comes back to its final pose there. Let's turn on loop. So the hips are kind of moving up and back just a tad, and then they start moving forward. The hips are always the driving force. It's usually what controls our motion. I like to think of it as the engine, and that's why I always start with the hips when I'm animating. I didn't used to. I used to be very, I would just do the entire pose, go from pose to pose to pose. Now I use more of a layered approach, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. But hopefully that kind of clarifies a little bit of follow through is. And you can see this guy back here throwing, where you see, let's just kind of get forward a little bit. Where this guy, he's throwing, practicing up in the background. You see just that hand kind of continues to go. Doesn't stop there at the throw and then come back. It follows this path, based on, its rotation, being attached to the shoulder and pivoting around that pivot point. All right, so hopefully that kind of clears up follow through, and again, we'll get into it more when we're doing this jump. Okay, so here we've got our rig. I'm gonna adjust grid here. Oh, it defaults to some weird crazy distance on the grid. Okay, So I'm going to select everything. One thing I like to do is I turn on pick mask, turn everything off, and then just click on that. So no matter what I select, I'm only selecting the control curves. Um, I've got a little shortcut that does it there as well. The only thing it doesn't select is all the joints and the fingers. I've got a little script here that'll select absolutely everything. And I'm sure we could probably add that with this rig. You guys find it useful. All right, so here I'm starting off. We're going to call this the default pose. You're working in games. Most of the animations, a lot of them come out of the default pose, which would be like the idle pose for your character. I probably wouldn't have this exact pose as the idle pose because it's a little dull and boring. I mean, it's very, symmetrical on both sides, which, just it doesn't make for the most exciting and dynamic pose. It's a little stiff. But for our purposes, we're going to call this his idle pose. And we're going to do a jump. Now, one thing I am adding here that we don't get to do a lot of times in games is I'm going to add an anticipation, especially on jumps. Typically, if you're playing a console game, you hit the button. You don't want the character to take time to squat down and then jump up. You want them to pop up immediately because that could mean either life or death to your character, if you're not getting that response time. And that's probably one of the bigger differences between film and games, or TV and games is that difference. In games, gameplay is paramount. So animation is subservient to gameplay. It has to support gameplay and not so much aesthetics. Whereas film, it's all about the aesthetic. So, if the animation, no matter how incredibly well it's animated and how great it looks, if it doesn't service gameplay, then it's going to get cut and modified until it does. So it can be a bit of a frustrating thing for an animator because you want something to look good and have anticipation, and a lot of animators are a bit frustrated by it because of the fact that we're trained to anticipate our movements. So it kind of goes against our grain a bit. So, all right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything again, and I'm going to just kind of drag along here to, I'm just going to say frame 5. Just going to set off about 30 frames here for the time being. Everything's currently cycled, so I'm going to turn off the cycling. And I'm going to start my anticipation pose. So now, initially, I was just going to kind of go ahead and do this, all the poses, and then ahead of time, have them pre-done, and then just kind of go over it with you guys. But I figured kind of seeing me go through the process would be extremely helpful. A little earlier, I think, than I wanted to do it in this DVD, but what the hell, right? And I think it'll be useful to, as we go over some of these other things, cover some of the other principles. You'll kind of already have an idea of what the workflow is in your head, and you'll be able to apply them a little clearer to that workflow, which I think will help. So again, we're starting the anticipation. Going to drop them down, and we're going to start to bend them over a little bit. And when you bend over, your hips are going to move back. And really kind of want to get a nice rounding of the back here. I may counter a little bit with this, try to get this back to round out. But one thing that I find difficult, and I'm not sure the way all studios do this, but a lot of times the character team will model certain attributes into the character itself that you end up as an animator fighting, and that you don't want. I know when we were on DC Universe Online, they had like this certain arch in the back built into the characters that we constantly were fighting, in the animations. And if the character modeling's done, without animators' input, it can be difficult because, a lot of times the character models are getting bought off on, and they want to see a certain pose. So the person that's kind of in charge, the client, let's say, doesn't really understand the process. So they'll want, they'll kind of have these almost poses sculpted into the mesh itself. Whereas if the mesh is sculpted in a more default pose, the animator, after it's rigged, can kind of add that back in and gives us more control over, the shapes we're getting in our animation. Hopefully that made sense to you guys, and I'm not just talking in circles here. So I'm dragging the head back a little bit. It looks like we're getting a little bit of a weighting problem in that fat bit of the neck. I have to have that addressed. All right. So now when you're animating, you always want to look for opportunities to have opposites in motion. So if the hips are dropping down here, you'll want the arms to come up. Because if everything's moving down at the same time, it's very stiff, very boring, and there's no interest. And again, this is part of the overlap. Because the hips are going down, you don't want the arms going down too. We're kind of breaking that up. The hips or the arms are kind of dragging behind. And maybe we want to really get, these calves way up. These arms up. Maybe we'll drop the forearms down a bit. I want to get the knees out a little bit here. We're getting some crashing going on here, so we want to adjust this bit. And again, a lot of times what we're faced with as animators is, some of the, models or characters that we're dealing with have very bizarre proportions. And, we can really struggle at times with those proportions to making something look good. You can see his neck is getting really stretched out, so I had to kind of compensate by bringing that down a little bit. If I just do with the head, it doesn't look too bad there. I'm getting kind of the roundness that I want here. Let me try to push it. See how far I can get this guy down. Let's see, does he feel like he's going to fall over? You want to make sure everything's in balance. That's one of the most important things in game animation, is having really good body mechanics. And, stuff having weight and balance is really key, because if it's off, it shows. Okay, so that's not bad. And I use the comma and period, or the greater than and less than key. They're basically the same key. To flip between my drawings. This would be like a traditional animator flipping between drawings, just to kind of see, the differences I'm getting. You can see I'm getting the body's kind of at this reverse C shape, and I've got this, strong C shape here to reverse that. That's always something you want to try to look for, because it gives real flexibility in your characters. A lot of times I'll see students have their character, and the spine will be rotated in one kind of position throughout the entire animation, which makes it look really stiff. So that's something that you want to look for, is chances to get those reversals in your spine. I'm just wondering if the butt should be over those feet a little bit more. But I'm worried he's going to be a little too top heavy if I do that. All right, so that looks okay. All right, and I'm not worried about timing right now at all. I'm just worrying about my poses, getting good poses. So then I'm going to go again, just ahead. Could really even do these on ones if you wanted to, and then do your timing afterwards. I usually do it like on fours. Look at my hands here. I want to get some rotation on these guys too. Again, if you have a question on a rotation, get into the pose yourself. One thing on hands, if you try to rotate your hand this way, you can't really go past this point, right? Unless maybe you're double jointed. And I see this a lot, and it just looks bad. The wrists look broken. This rotation, you can get about a 45 degree, maybe not quite 45, but maybe 30, and it'll still look okay. You really have to check yourself in your rotations. You always want to make sure you're moving around your pose to make sure everything's kind of looking good, and even on top, very important. Okay. All right, so I moved ahead and made those changes, so I need to go back. So I'm just basically selecting everything, middle mouse click to frame 5, hitting the S key to save, and just to copy that pose. So now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, basically I'm going to zero this out, copy frame 1, save it to frame 9. And the reason why I do that is it tends to keep your curves cleaner. You won't get into some weird rotation issues in gimbal lock in your in-betweens, as it starts to in between your poses. So it's just a really good habit to keep your work really clean. And if you notice too, is workflow, I have keys on everything at the same frame. I don't kind of come over here and just move an arm and then move over here and then just move, the leg. Everything is keyed on every frame, because when we get into editing, when you're moving keys around, you're moving everything. And it's really important, especially when you start messing around with curves, because your curves can get really messy, and your animation, you'll just get lost because you won't remember what's keyed where. And this is just a good workflow, to keep on top of everything and keep everything clean. So now on this keyframe, he's going to shift his weight over to this foot, because this is the foot that he's going to be really pushing off with. This other foot, we're going to switch it over to F. Actually, let me get it into pose. One thing I like to do a lot is I'll use IK to pose something out and get it in the position I want it in, and then I'll switch it back to FK. So then it's just a quicker way to get it into then, rotating each individual joint. Now remember, you're getting paid to produce work, so you're expected to do it in a timely fashion. So the quicker you can become as an animator, the more of an asset you'll be. A lot of times, companies will pick speed over quality, because they've got deadlines. We're not creating your own personal masterpiece. You're creating, most of the time you're creating somebody else's idea, and they're paying you to do so. Again, we're getting, some collision here in the thigh and the gut, again, and then the calf and the thigh, because it's got these little fat, pudgy, stumpy legs, so it's really hard to get a lot of rotation in them. Now, in a studio situation, I would go back to, the rigor and see if we could come up with a, weighting solution to help minimize this type of stuff. All right, so the hips, because the knee is as high as it is going to push the hip down and up on this side. And again, we're getting that collision there, but not a ton we can do about it at this point. So I'm going to keep some of this, drag. The spine's not going to pop right up again. So it's still going to have some bend to it as it comes up. Maybe, I'm just thinking that maybe I want the elbows back here. Let's rotate the clavicle back a little bit, up and back. Want the wrists kind of down here. Check that rotation to make sure it's okay. And flip between the two. And then I'm going to want the arm to kind of come forward here. A bit of a weighting issue here. Not quite. See if I can get this even more. Just trying to push it. It's always good to push your pose as far as possible, because you can always come back from it, right? Well, was always told, push it as far as you can go, and then once you think is as far as it can go, push it even further. I guess I don't want it. Maybe I still want the shoulders back. This rig's getting a little ugly. Let's zero this out. And the weighting may need to be adjusted here. And I'm going to actually zero out this clavicle as well. Kind of tip it back. I really want it to be down. Zero that out again. Trying to figure out a good path with the arms. They can break it with the wrist here. Straighten the elbow out. Right now I'm just kind of searching for my pose. Yeah, that's not so bad. Again, for the sake of this exercise, we'll just kind of go with it. And we want to drop the clavicle here as well. All right, so let's see here. Flip through our drawings. I want this to come back there a little bit. Looking at the hips here. So we have the frame here. We're going to go to our new frame. I'm going to basically copy everything from 1, and I'm going to save it here at 13. And then we're going to take him, we're going to bring him up in the air. But first, we're going to switch his feet to be FK because he's jumping. All right. And then we're going to have this leg be at its extreme bent pose. That. Get the knee out a little bit. And, maybe this leg's starting to come up as well. Bent. Now the arms are starting to come up a little bit. Calves. I like to start with the calves and then move my way down. And then I like to start with the hips and then move my way off the hips. Kind of lead with the elbows a little bit here. And then bring them over a little bit. I'm looking at the arc, the kind of the path of the hips as I'm quickly flipping my drawings. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And let's look at it from the side. So maybe we still have a little bit of, bend here. Again, using all the controls of the spine. Maybe counter that one a little bit. All right, the hips are going to be higher here. Now, typically the chest, torso area is going to counter the rotation of the hips in order to keep the body in balance. That's pretty common, in body mechanics. It's something that you learn. Bring this a little bit forward. And selecting both the head. I didn't select both the head that time, and the neck. All right, you want to get that twist in the body to make it, flexible and feel fluid and dynamic and not stiff and rigid. So then I want to do another pose, and this time we're going to go a few frames more again. And I'm not zeroing it out because this frame isn't going to be that different. Oh, see, it's trying to. This is for the IK switch, I think. Frame 10. We're going to do a switcheroo here. to be FK. A little forced, but I think that's okay for now. And let's just select everything. All right, so now I've got this pose on 10. I'm going to go ahead and just key everything. Not sure what's on 12, but I'll key everything there too. Then I've got these two poses. The legs are going to start to switch, where this one is now the highest, the bent, the knee's the higher of the two, and this one's going to start to come down. And then the hips, let's just zero those out. There's this little tool here that I got from Creative Crash that just will zero out whatever channels that an object has instead of selecting and hitting 0 and then pressing enter. Again, anything that makes you a faster animator is always a good thing. I'm going to twist it because this foot's a little further forward. I'm going to do the same thing with this. Now it's going to rotate this way a little bit. And then we'll bring this side forward, and then we'll select head and neck. And then we're going to continue to have the calves coming up, the arms coming up, hands coming out. I'm going to drag these a little bit down. Come back to here and adjust the hands a little bit more. So now, maybe we'll get a little bit of vertical on here too. Now we start to play it. You can kind of see doing his little jump. And then he's going to start to come down. Again, 4 frames. Not so worried about the timing. And again, we're going to go back here. And we are going to save a keyframe. We're going to lift them up a little bit. We're going to have this one still be on FK. Bring the knee up, bend the knee, foot's down, bend the knee more. Lift him up. Maybe we'll actually have him come down on the toe. On this frame going backwards here, we want to start to have him to open up the chest a little bit. And then as he comes down, we really want to get that in there. We'll drop the torso forward like this so we can bring all the stuff back a little bit. How that's looking. You can see the back rolling back, which is good. Let's take a look at the arms. We'll want the hands to come up at this point. Clavicles high. Rotation there. Bring these guys in. Rotate the clavs down. Bring his body back a little bit so it's more in line. The weight is coming down directly over that foot. And then we'll come again, same thing, select everything, middle mouse click, 4 frames or thereabouts. We're going to want this to hit in like 2 frames, so we're going to switch it, and then we're going to copy this frame. Let me go back here. All right, so we want it to hit, to be in this pose by frame 22. So this should all be keyed. 22, select this guy, switch it, oops, switch it, select that. Why didn't key at frame 24? That's weird. All right, so we're going to select that, pose at 1, middle mouse click, and lock it down on frame 22. And then here, we're going to drop his body down, right, to have that compression. His knees come out. You can see, when I get this foot, I may want to rotate this forward a little bit. Okay, and still give him some of that backward arch as he comes down. And I still want the elbows leading here, so I'm going to bring these up. I'm getting more control from the clav on this rig. Because these arms are so weird. Let's bring the hands up and drag them back. We're breaking those joints. We want the elbow to go first. Again, let's get them way down. Really compress them. And then what I would probably do here is I'd start to have the body come up. Again, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to key it. Again, not worrying about my timing at all. I'm going to zero those out. And we're going to roll everything forward now. And we're going to bring this back and start to come up. And then we can drop clavs. The arms out a little bit. Now let's kind of look at it from the side here and see. This needs to come back a little bit. This could even probably come forward a little bit more. Comes forward. Then he kind of comes up and back. You can see how overlapping that spine gives it that flexibility. And then we'll come back here. And then we'll copy everything to frame 30. Now if we play this, now again, the timing's not quite there. Give it a hold at the end for like 10 frames. You know, it's a start. It's a good starting point. Now going back to arcs, if we select our hips here, go to animate, create the trail, we can see the arc, you know, of the hips that it's following. I may want to, you know, emphasize this a little bit more here by bringing it over some. What's nice about Maya's arc tracker is that it immediately updates the curve when you change it, which is kind of nice. And you have the hands following through. Actually, everything kind of comes to that complete stop here at the end. I would probably have another couple frames here. I'd set another key. I'd actually have him overshoot this pose a little bit. Go up on his toes just a touch. Bring these arms in, maybe even a little bit more here. Clavs too. And then, again, go back here. Select another 4 frames. And then here we're going to overshoot the arms a little bit. And then they settle. We select that. Oh, go back to here. Load up my graph editor. Make sure that everything's flat here. Let me check the Y translation. So it eases into that last pose. You can kind of see we're starting to get a jump. Again, the timing's not really worked out. You know, we're getting a lot of bend in that spine, which is good. We may even want to push it a little bit up here. What I would probably do is rotate it back like this, counter with the hips. I don't think I want to do it there either. Let me undo that a little bit. Actually, I might want to do it here. Bring this back. Bring his head down just a little bit because we don't want him looking off into the stars. It's looking a little bit better. let's get rid of that motion trail. We're getting the knees are locking and doing something funky here. They probably have to a little bit more bend on the knees as he comes up. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a heel roll. I zero the knee out, actually. All right, so we're getting some rotation. See that how the knees are twisting here? Well, we probably want to counter that a little bit. Open them up. Maybe start to bring them in here. Delete that frame because I actually saved the key on the wrong frame. All right, so you got something to work with. The head's snapping pretty hard there. I would want to counter that, soften that. So let's soften that a little bit. Drop it here. Start to bring it up. We turn off the rig controls. You can see it a little bit closer. Then you got like a little jump. Now from this point, again, this is real rough. First pass at blocking. I would start doing some tests. I'd probably still soften that landing a little bit. I'd track the arcs on the hands. Make them stop a little bit more naturally. You know, I would track the feet, the arcs on the feet, to make sure that they're looking all right. And then once I started making all my pose adjustments, I think that's a little bit too far back. Counter with this. There we go. The timing's a little messed up. Oh, maybe this is a little. There we go. Let's kind of soften that up a little bit. So then I would want to go and mess with my timing a little bit, select all. So maybe I want the anticipation to build. I'm going to add some in-betweens. So you get this nice build up. And then I want him to kind of explode out of this pose. So I'm going to cut out these in-betweens. And really just kind of launch up in the air. And then I want to give him some nice hang time here. So I'm going to add some in-betweens there. And then when he comes down, I want to cut this. Because gravity is working, pulling him down. He's going to come down faster than it would be to come up. We really want it. Now that leg is stretching out. So we'd want to fix that. It's interpolating between the FK and the IK right here. So we would want to probably switch this and then switch it back. get the IK more in line of where we wanted it. And then we're getting a little overshoot on there. So let's open up our graph editor. Just lock that down so you can see it right here. Flatten that out. So now it's good. The animation's got a little bit more pop to it. Let's mess with some timing some more. So when he comes down, then maybe I want this to kind of slow down a little bit. So I'm going to add a couple in-betweens. I'm going to add one here. I'm going to add one here. And then he comes up. So now if we look at this, and this is the reason why I like to work this way, is because I can quickly modify my timing to get what I want without it being a big issue in getting lost with keys, getting screwed up, or just getting a lot of undesirable effects when you start sliding keys around, because you know where all the keys are. Sliding them around is not gonna give you any undesirable effects, and you're gonna know right where everything is. So I want the feet are kind of coming up on the toes a little sooner than I want them to. So this is when you can start breaking things up. Maybe they would come up there, and then they'd be back down by here. So I'm actually going to zero that out. You're going to watch the knees. So maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I would keep them a little bent here. I'm going to actually add another in between, or a keyframe. That's not looking right either. All right, so what I think I'm going to do is, instead of messing around, delete those guys. All right, I'm going to open up the graph editor. I'm going to select the heel control. If you right click on heel control and hit show selected types, it's only going to show the controls for those two types. I'm going to delete that keyframe, keep those flat, and then you could reset it. That basically turns the filter off there. I'm going to select the main body here, open up the graph editor back up, and I'm just going to modify that overshoot. Bring it down a little bit. And then maybe we can add just a slight bit of the heel. And I think that'll help. Yeah, it makes it feel a little bit better. So there you go. So then you've got, a relatively good foundation to start, building this animation and start fleshing it out more. I'd probably drag the arms a little bit more, maybe have them come down a little bit faster. I may take another pass through all the poses and see if I can strengthen them. Make sure the mechanics are right, things like that. I have them come up. Right now, comes up and kind of hits this wall laterally on X. Let's show his motion trail again. See here, he's coming down 21 here. It comes down to 22, and then he's at 26, kind of hits this wall and then comes straight up. But I actually want him to overshoot this way. So it's a nice arc back up. And he comes over a little bit here and then back down. So then he's got that nice little pop. And the arc is a little cleaner. It makes it a little bit more fluid looking. You never want to animate anything on just one axis. You want to make sure you're using everything. So here, let's see what we could do on this. He's coming up and back. Bring him back a little bit here to get that. You know, it's a sharp arc, but it's an arc. He comes forward. I want to have him come forward a little bit more here and then back. Just subtle little bitty things that add to your animation. Turn off the brake controls. Let's get rid of that. And there we go. There's our, blocking of jump with overlap. The arms are following through. The head's following through. I'd want to clean that head up too. So you want it to drag back here. Turn the controls back on. Maybe drag it a little bit more here. Up and then down. Okay. Feeling a little stiff still too. So it drags, that's fine. I'd actually want it to drag back here and then settle a couple frames later to here. All right, so then I'd want the chest kind of drag as well. So we're going to key it there where the head is. Just have that kind of come up. Now we're getting some bounce in. You can open up the graph editor. And we're probably getting, yeah, see all that overshoot we're getting here? That's what's going on. So we're getting that wobble. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Point these keys. We're going to flatten that. And we're just going to bring that down. Do the same thing with this guy. Rotate. I'm going to flatten that out. Bring this down a little bit. Soften that. And then this bottom one, bring that down. Point it to there. Oops. There. Flatten that. And just make that a little more shallow. I thought I flattened it. I guess I didn't. All right. So now it softens it. Again, I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself here in that finishing stuff because I could be, modifying the animation, the poses more and stuff at this point. Right now, you're just kind of building the framework of your animation, making sure the mechanics are right, the poses are solid. You work on your timing, and then you go through and you can start refining. Alrighty, so hopefully that helps clarify, overlap and follow through. And one thing too, as I'm looking at this, as the arms come back, they kind of hit a wall here. They don't follow through that path, and that would be a dead giveaway. So I would have them. Let me select everything here. I have these additional keyframes, and I'm saving keys on this stuff. So as I step through it, I'm going to kind of look at the arm and see where it hits. And it's right there. So I'm going to have this continue to follow through. You want this frame to be pretty close to that one. So I'm going to have it. Let's see. So it's following through a little bit better there. I think what's happening is we're getting a flat tangent in here because it slows down there and it speeds up. If I open up the graph editor and check out my curves, flatten that, you were getting that overshoot. Maybe that's what I was seeing. Just flatten it. This could be it too here. Here it is. Oops. The X. So we would want to flatten that out. Bring that up a little bit. There. We've got a little bit of a hitch to it, but it's getting there. Again, you just continue to refine. You look for issues like that, and I would do the same with this arm. So it followed through and a nice arc to it. Alrighty. So again, hope that that should clarify overlap and follow through for you. And let's move on.